Have you ever looked up at the stars and wondered, are we alone? It's a question that has captivated humanity for centuries. But what if I told you that ancient texts from thousands of years ago might hold the answer? And what if that answer is not just that we aren't alone, but that our very creators came from the stars? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most compelling and controversial theories in ancient history, the story of the Anunnaki. Let's travel back in time to ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Here, in what is now modern-day Iraq, the Sumerians flourished. They gave us writing, the wheel, astronomy, and complex city-states. They also left behind thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script. For a long time, scholars viewed these as myths, epic poems, and king lists. But in the 20th century, a scholar named Zecharia Sitchin proposed a radical new interpretation. He claimed these weren't just myths, they were historical records. Sitchin, who spent decades translating these Sumerian texts, argued that they tell a detailed story of a race of extraterrestrial beings, called the Anunnaki. The word Anunnaki translates to something like those who from heaven to earth came. According to Sitchin's translations, these beings came from a planet in our own solar system, a planet unknown to modern science. The Sumerians called it Nibiru. So what's the story with Nibiru? The texts describe it as a planet with a massive, highly elliptical orbit, taking about 3,600 Earth years to circle the Sun. This long orbit means it spends most of its time far out in the cold darkness of space, only passing through the inner solar system for a relatively brief period. Sitchin theorized that as Nibiru's atmosphere began to deteriorate, the Anunnaki faced an existential crisis. They needed a specific element to repair it: gold. Not for currency or jewelry, but for its unique properties that could be used to create a protective shield in their atmosphere, reflecting sunlight and retaining heat. Their search for gold, according to this theory, led them to a promising blue planet teeming with resources, Earth. Around 450,000 years ago, the first Anunnaki explorers, led by a figure named Enki, supposedly splashed down in the Persian Gulf and established their first base, Eridu, which means home in the faraway. Their mission was simple: mine gold and ship it back to Nibiru. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds like a sci-fi movie. But the Sumerian texts are surprisingly detailed. They list the names of the leaders, the locations of their settlements, and the challenges they faced. The initial mining operations were in southern Africa. The tablets describe the Anunnaki toiling in the mines for thousands of years. But it was hard, grueling work, and eventually, the working-class Anunnaki staged a mutiny. They refused to work any longer. This rebellion presented a huge problem for the Anunnaki leadership. Their mission was in jeopardy. This is where the story takes a fascinating and, for us, a very personal turn. Enki, the chief scientist, proposed a solution. He suggested creating a primitive worker, a slave race, to take over the labor in the mines. How? By taking the existing hominids on Earth, creatures like Homo erectus, and upgrading their DNA with the Anunnaki's own genetic material. This is the Anunnaki's version of the creation of humanity. The texts describe a process of genetic engineering, of trial and error in a lab they called the House of Shimti. They detail the roles of Enki and a chief medical officer named Ninti, who acted as a surrogate mother for the first successful hybrid. This new being was called the Adamu, a name that has an uncanny resemblance to the biblical Adam. The Adamu were hybrids, capable of understanding orders and performing complex tasks, but initially unable to procreate. The story continues, explaining that eventually, humanity was further modified to be able to reproduce on their own. As humans multiplied, they weren't just miners. They were also used as servants in the Anunnaki cities in Mesopotamia. The Sumerian king lists, for example, talk about kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years, lifespans that seem impossible for humans, but might just make sense for long-lived extraterrestrial beings. These Anunnaki weren't just bosses, they were worshipped as gods. The pantheon of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian gods Anu, Enlil, Enki, Ishtar, Sitchin argued, were not mythical figures, but the actual names of these Anunnaki rulers. The stories of their power struggles, their jealousies, and their relationships with humanity became the foundation of our earliest mythologies and religions. The Great Flood, found in the Epic of Gilgamesh and later in the Bible, is explained in the tablets as a decision made by the Anunnaki leader Enlil to wipe out a noisy and bothersome humanity. But Enki, the creator and protector of mankind, secretly warned a human named Ziusudra the Sumerian and Noah to build a boat and save himself, his family, and the seed of all living things. The Anunnaki theory suggests that these gods taught humanity agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, and how to build cities. They were the civilizing force that propelled us from primitive hominids to a sophisticated society in a remarkably short period of time. Then, for reasons that are debated, sometime after the flood, the Anunnaki began to depart. Perhaps their mission was complete, or perhaps their own internal conflicts forced them to leave. They handed over rulership of the cities to human kings and, for the most part, left Earth, promising to return one day when Nibiru makes its next pass through our solar system. So, what are we to make of all this? Mainstream archaeology and history dismiss Sitchin's work. Critics point out that his translations are often unconventional and not supported by other scholars. They argue that he takes literary and mythological texts and treats them as literal history, fitting the evidence to his theory rather than the other way around. The existence of a planet like Nibiru is, of course, not accepted by modern astronomy, although the search for a hypothetical planet 9 in the outer solar system keeps the idea tantalizingly alive for some. However, the supporters of the ancient astronaut theory find compelling clues everywhere. They point to the sudden explosion of Sumerian civilization, the advanced knowledge of astronomy they possessed, like knowing about Uranus and Neptune long before modern telescopes, and the countless depictions of strange figures in ancient art. They look at giant megalithic structures around the world, like Baalbek in Lebanon, with its impossibly large foundation stones, and ask, could humans have built this with primitive tools, or did they have help? The Anunnaki theory also offers an alternative explanation for the missing link in human evolution and the sudden jump in brain capacity that occurred with Homo sapiens. Could genetic manipulation be the answer? Whether you believe the Anunnaki were real extraterrestrial creators or simply the powerful gods of a rich and imaginative mythology, their story is undeniably epic. It weaves together the creation of humanity, the Great Flood, the origins of gods and kings, and a lost planet in our solar system. It challenges us to look at our most ancient stories not as simple fables, but as possible echoes of a forgotten, extraordinary past. It forces us to ask, are the stories in the Bible, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and other ancient texts actually distorted accounts of real events involving advanced beings from another world? Were the gods of antiquity not gods at all, but flesh and blood astronauts? The evidence is there, written on clay tablets, waiting to be interpreted. But the final conclusion is up to you. What do you think? Was Zecharia Sitchin a visionary who uncovered the true history of humanity, or was he just a fantastic storyteller? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into our mysterious past, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you next time.